And I think the key messaging this evening is that leadership does matter. And it matters in terms of how we take innovation forward. We've seen in terms of Dr. Spici's messaging as well, in terms of the various things that have happened over the years, in terms of the CSIR and globally, and it all hinges on leadership. And in the example that I show in terms of the conductor, Gustavo Dudamel, and this is one of the things that you see quite often when you watch an orchestra performing, is you see the conductor, but he never says a word. He never makes a sound. But you leave the orchestra, the performance of that particular evening, feeling that you have been enriched. And somehow the conductor sticks in your mind. And so that's the message, that's the first key messaging that I'd like you to actually have, and I'll come back to end with this particular key messaging. And I think for the leaders in the room, the business leaders, what it means is that we've got to actually set the example. We've got to be able to take the risk. Innovation, unfortunately, is risky. The default position that we see for most of the things that are done is that there is a certain level of failure. When it comes to technological innovation, the failure is even higher. And in certain industries, the failure is even higher. If you look at the pharmaceuticals, things get into clinical trials, far advanced, and then they have to be aborted because of side effects. But what is innovation? And I've borrowed two definitions. One is from the OECD Oslo Manual, and the other one is from our 2002 R&D strategy. And the first one looks at the implementation of a new or significantly improved product or process, new marketing method, new organizational method, somewhere within the workplace. It's quite a broad definition. It goes beyond the technological innovation. And we look at the second one in terms of the R&D strategy. It's a process which an idea or invention is translated into goods or services for which people will pay or use. So it's something that results from this particular process. And somewhere in between, one moves from R&D, but the research is not in itself innovation. An invention is not by itself an innovation. And it's quite important to be able to distinguish between the two. And quite a common definition for me that it has helped is to say that an invention is when you put in, it's a process where you put in the money and then you get new knowledge. So that new knowledge, quite often, it's a new knowledge that never existed, so it's an invention. But in order to turn that invention into an innovation, it has to get into the marketplace. So it becomes a process where you take that new knowledge or new idea that has come through as a result of investing resources, money, and otherwise intellectual, and then applying it to a particular problem and extracting value. Somebody has got to pay for it, or there's got to be value. So the real distinction is that when you talk about innovation, there's a marketplace. And the marketplace, there's exchange of goods, and somebody believes that this will help and enhance the value to whatever their business is. So it becomes a point of differentiation, for business. So as a business leader, why would I invest in R&D? Why would I invest in innovation, in turning the results of the R&D into something that we can be able to use in the market? It's because it differentiates us from the other people in the market. And we look at, in terms of, some of the studies that have been done by a survey that gets done annually by Innovation Agency, asking a whole range of group of leaders at Gibbs in Joburg every year in terms of what are the sources of innovation. And the common thread that comes out is that the customers are the sources of innovation, because they interact with the customers, and interacting with the customers, they get to understand what are the challenges that these customers face in terms of using their products and services. And so it becomes one of those questions that, what is the pain that the customer has got to go through in order to be able to use my product or my service, which pain they don't have to go through if they're using somebody else's product. But it comes down, and for me, the interesting thing was that Technology or research is further down. And it's interesting, but yet they are linked, because by getting that feedback from the customers, you can go back, invest in research, and then be able to move forward. But what are those other sources of innovation? And I think we talk about the changing faces of Africa. We look at the demographics, the profile of Africa. What we realize is that the profile of Africa is different from the rest of the world. We've got a youthful population as Africa. And South Africa in particular, we've got about 49.6% of our population is under the age of 25. And therefore what it means is that we've got to create the opportunities for those youth. It's no longer just focusing on jobs. We need to start to create businesses, but also on the understanding that most of the businesses will fail. But we've got to provide the opportunities. We've got to start to change the way that we're doing things. And if we don't address this, fast forward 40 years from now, this population will be aged, will be faced with a different kind of a problem, where we would not be able to cater for ourselves. And so if one looks at the demographics are one of those initial immediate sources of innovation in terms of what kind of opportunities do we create for the youth, so that the youth can be gainfully employed and they can feel that they're actually contributing. We look at urbanization. If you drive on the M3 from whichever direction, looking on this side, what you see is that you see Alex, and then further you then see Sandton City. But in between, it's different. The profile is different. The congestion is different. And what you're seeing is more and more people are moving from the rural areas into the urban areas. And there is congestion. So there's room for innovation in terms of how we deliver services to the people in those areas, whether those services be water, electricity, waste removal, waste management, pollution management, and just how people move from within those communities into the other areas. So this growth around the world is really a source of innovations. We look at the water scarcity, and we can talk about the electricity scarcity as well as we go into another phase of load shedding. The questions are, what innovations can be able to help us deal with these particular issues? And so we moved as well from the world of closed research to co-creation. And traditionally, how businesses have done research is everything is closed, is protected, and nobody wants to talk outside in terms of what we're doing. But the danger is that there are customers out there, there are suppliers out there that are interacting with your products. And those particular people know a lot more about your product. And if one looks at Procter & Gamble said, well, we got about 9,000 people in R&D, but there's over 2 million people out there that are using and interacting with our products. How can we tap into the minds of these particular people so that we can then create and develop? So they started to cooperate and develop, and today the concept that was started off by Chesbro in terms of open innovation is a concept that is really feeding the competitiveness of many companies. So we've taken it one step further at the Innovation Hub. We've set up a platform called the Open Innovation Solution Exchange, where we then bring together the solution seekers, which are largely business, as well as the providers, which is the research institutions, the science councils, as well as small medium enterprises to provide solutions to the seekers. Quite an interesting study that has been done by Goldman Sachs. You can Google it, 2 Decades of Freedom. And really, I think in the next 3 or 4 slides is to look at what is the state of innovation in South Africa. If one reads the National Development Plan, 2 things stand out for me in terms of the NDP. The one is the NDP recognizes that innovation is necessary for a middle-income country such as South Africa to be able to develop further. So that is promising, at least within our vision, there is the common vision, there is that recognition by our political leaders that innovation is important. But it goes further and says that for us to be able to sharpen our innovative edge as a country, we need to strengthen that cooperation between the public sector, the public science and technology institutions, and the private sector. So we cannot divorce the various institutions. We've got to be able to bring them together. And notwithstanding the fact that perhaps we need to take a broader approach to innovation, one would also have to borrow in terms of what has been happening globally and say, perhaps we need to place more emphasis on technological innovation. It gives you a bigger jump. But from there, you can be able to build other things around that. You look at the gross expenditure on research and development over the past 20 years, and what we see is that from 1994, it was flat for a while up until 1997. And bear in mind that the science, white science paper came out, I think, in 1996. And we've seen it grow in 2002. The R&D strategy also started to talk about increasing the expenditure. At 2006, it peaked at about 0.96%. But again, GDP is a moving target. And so what we also see is it tapering off because we're not actually investing more. But I think the sad thing for me is that if we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, is that business, as in private sector, is not spending as much compared to Europe, OECD countries, USA, China, or even Japan. In fact, government spends more on R&D in South Africa. And so business leaders in the room, and again, I think the business school is to also start to emphasize to the business leaders that come and interact with the business school that we need to start to invest more. And government has provided some incentives as a tax incentive for business to start to do R&D investment. So there is a tax incentive. Why don't we invest that? And we need to make the investment in South Africa as opposed to channeling the investment in R&D to other parts of the world. We need to be putting the money into our own universities, CSIR, Agricultural Research Council, Medical Research Council, and the like. You look at the Global Competitiveness Index, we seem, on the competitiveness side, we seem to be getting worse. Even on the innovation side, well, we're getting better. But the question is, what is the difference between 44 and 39? There's hardly any difference. So in essence, we're just cruising along. And I think we need to start to address some of these issues. In that particular report, one of the recommendations is to look at driving innovation via increased investment in R&D. And the value proposition is that there's a whole market that is waiting out there. Africa is a huge market. You fast forward 20 years from now, if it's not going to be the biggest market in the world, it's probably going to be the second biggest market in the world. And how much of that market is South Africa going to command? Because today, when we talk to researchers, they say, well, we're going to the USA, we're going to China, we're going to Europe, because it's a bigger market. But Africa is a bigger market, and I think for South Africans operating from South Africa and using this as a base into the rest of the African continent, we are better placed than people coming in from outside of Africa to be able to start to participate. And so in the last two slides is really to say, what is the messaging? So we're seeing this increased awareness of innovation amongst business. We're seeing business leaders of all different sectors saying they want to do more. We're talking to the various government, state-owned enterprises. We're starting to do programs with them. We're starting to do more and more with also multinationals operating in South Africa that are wanting to start to develop new products or customize the ones that are developed in Germany for the local markets. So people are searching for that differentiation, but we're not doing enough. So that's the message. We're not doing enough, and we need to do more.